14 plants went quiet before Pierce Sterling finished his coffee. The federal investigator placed my black notebook beside the litigation hold notice and slid it across the table. Pierce stared at it like the thing could breathe. Rain tapped the windows above Allen Parkway. Downtown Houston looked gray and washed out behind him. Nobody in that room spoke for 6 seconds. That was long enough for a CEO to understand his empire had a pulse. And that pulse had stopped. The investigator tapped the cover once. "Mr. Sterling, why did your company move Mason Grant every 6 weeks?" Pierce looked at me then. Not angry. Not confused. Afraid. That surprised me more than the subpoenas. Men like Pierce do not fear people. They fear patterns. "My name is Mason Grant. I am 54 years old. For 23 years, I worked as a senior process safety and federal compliance auditor. That is a long title for a simple job. I checked the emergency brakes before rich men drove the truck downhill. Aegis Risk Logistics owned refrigerated food plants across the South and Midwest. Houston, Baton Rouge, Tulsa, Little Rock, Beaumont, Memphis, St. Louis. Places where ammonia lines hummed behind concrete walls. Places where workers trusted alarms to work before the air turned wrong. Places executives called assets on a spreadsheet. I called them rooms full of people. My notebook sat between us on the table. Black cover, rounded corners, coffee stain near the spine. I bought it at a drugstore near the Louisiana State Capitol after my 4th transfer. Back then, I thought I was keeping myself sane. Date, time, plant, manager, alarm code, smell, weather, exact words used. I wrote everything down because memory gets attacked first. Lawyers call it unreliable. Executives call it emotional. But ink is stubborn. Ink does not care who owns the building. Pierce had moved me every 6 weeks for nearly a year. He called it operational mobility. Human resources called it cross-site leadership support. The board called it efficiency. I called it being pulled from fires before I could prove who kept lighting matches. Every plant had the same polite lie. Temporary calibration drift. It appeared in maintenance logs, insurance summaries, and safety briefings. Same phrase. Same timing. Same dead-eyed smile from managers who would not meet mine. To the public, it sounded harmless. Like a thermometer needing adjustment. To me, it sounded like a smoke alarm with the batteries removed. The investigator opened nothing. He did not need to. My handwriting had already been scanned, indexed, and matched against transfer orders. 14 plants were suspended by 8:12 that morning. Trucks sat cold outside loading bays. Production dashboards went red. Phones rang through the glass walls behind us. Pierce did not touch his phone. His general counsel did not touch hers either. They both knew the same thing. This was not one mistake. It was a map, and I had drawn every mile of it. Before I tell you how we got there, pay attention to one thing. I never hacked a system. I never threatened anyone. I never leaked a file to the press. I just listened when powerful people talked too comfortably. I wrote down what they thought nobody would connect. And if you have ever watched a company punish the only person telling the truth, you already know where this road starts. It starts in a conference room where everyone smiles too hard. It starts with a CEO saying safety is important, then asking how much it costs. Mine started 6 months earlier, inside Aegis headquarters near the Port of Houston, when Pierce Sterling looked at 14 plant managers and said downtime was no longer a safety measure. It was margin leakage. I clicked my pen once under the table. Then I opened the first page of the notebook. I had been doing that job longer than Pierce Sterling had been wearing tailored suits. 23 years teaches you how buildings lie. Not the walls, the people inside them. A safe plant has a rhythm. Compressors cycle clean. Forklifts move without rushing. Supervisors answer simple questions without checking who is listening. An unsafe plant feels different. The air gets tight. Clipboards disappear. Managers smile with their mouths closed. My job was not glamorous. I walked floors in steel-toe boots. I checked ammonia sensors, evacuation routes, refrigeration valves, maintenance logs, and worker training records. I compared what the system said against what the building whispered. If those two stories did not match, I stayed until they did. Aegis paid me well because I kept insurance carriers calm. Every year, I helped prepare our loss control audit before renewal season. That audit decided whether our plants stayed insurable. No insurance meant no contracts. No contracts meant empty loading docks. The board understood that once. The founder understood it too. Pierce understood only the premium. He saw risk as a line item waiting to be squeezed. I saw it as a locked door with smoke behind it. I learned documentation the hard way. In this business, the first report is never the final report. Someone edits the language. Someone softens the verb. Someone replaces failed with delayed. That is why I kept chain of custody on everything important. Original document. Source location. Time received. Person present. Who touched it next. Boring details, until a lawyer asks who changed page 3. Then boring becomes oxygen. My office was never really an office. It was whatever rental car, break room, or motel desk I could find. I had written reports from a Hampton Inn outside Tulsa. I had reviewed sensor histories at a Waffle House near Beaumont. I had taken calls beside the Mississippi River in Memphis, watching barges move slow under gray clouds. Aegis liked that about me. At least they used to. I was portable, quiet, and hard to impress. Plant managers did not fear me because I yelled. I never yelled. They feared the pause after I turned a page. That pause meant I had found the second story, the one under the official one. Before Pierce arrived, my reports went straight to compliance, legal, and insurance. After Pierce arrived, everything changed direction. Reports went through operations first. Exceptions became observations. Failures became variances. Emergency bypass became temporary calibration drift. That phrase started showing up everywhere. Houston used it in March. Baton Rouge used it in April. Tulsa used it in May. Same phrase. Same font. Same lazy lie wearing clean shoes. I asked a Baton Rouge supervisor where he first heard it. He looked toward the ceiling camera and said nothing. That told me plenty. Silence is data if you know how to measure it. By then, Pierce had started calling me a resource. Not Mason. Not auditor. Resource. He said resources needed mobility. He said mobility created fresh perspective. Then human resources sent my first 6-week assignment. Baton Rouge. Then Tulsa. Then Little Rock. Then Beaumont. Always before my findings became formal. Always before signatures locked. Always before the paper turned dangerous. I did not argue. I bought better pens. Black ink for facts. Blue ink for direct quotes. Red ink for dates that repeated. By the time I reached Little Rock, my notebook had stopped being a habit. It had become a map. Little Rock was where the pattern stopped looking like coincidence. The plant sat east of downtown, past the Arkansas River, behind a chain-link fence and a row of tired pine trees. From the outside, it looked ordinary. Trucks in, trucks out. White vapor curling from roof vents. Men in reflective vests walking fast because cold chain work punishes delay. Inside, the building felt too clean. That was my first warning. Real plants have scars. Tape marks on concrete. Grease shadows around old valves. Coffee rings on maintenance desks. This place looked staged for a lender visit. Every binder faced the same direction. Every log sheet had perfect handwriting. Every supervisor used the same careful words. We have had no reportable safety concerns, one told me. He said it like he had practiced in his truck. I asked for the compressor alarm history. He brought me a summary. I asked for the raw export. He said the system was updating. I asked when updates started hiding yesterday. He stopped smiling. That pause went into the notebook. Blue ink. Direct observation. 9:14 in the morning. Little Rock Plant 3. Supervisor avoided raw alarm export request. Same day, I found the phrase again. Temporary calibration drift. It sat inside 3 maintenance reports like a dead moth under glass. Houston had used it after a pressure spike. Baton Rouge used it after a sensor reset. Tulsa used it after a false evacuation drill. Now Little Rock had used it after a shutdown alarm vanished from the dashboard. For states. For plants. Same phrase. Same excuse. Same convenient timing. I drove past the Arkansas state capitol that evening and parked near a grocery store. The notebook lay open on my passenger seat. I drew 4 dots across the page. Houston. Baton Rouge. Tulsa. Little Rock. Then I connected them with a straight line. It looked too simple. That bothered me. Real accidents are messy. Bad luck scatters. Lies repeat. The next morning, I called compliance records in Houston. A young analyst named Priya answered. She was sharp, quiet, and careful. I asked who approved the new incident language. She lowered her voice. Operations did. I asked which operations office. She waited 3 seconds. Executive office. That was all she would say. 3 seconds was also data. I wrote it down. Later that week, Pierce visited the plant. He arrived in a black sport utility vehicle with Texas plates. No hard hat until someone handed him one. No clipboard. No dust on his shoes. He walked the floor like a man touring property he planned to sell. Plant managers tightened around him. People laughed faster. Answers got shorter. I watched him stand beneath a warning light and talk about velocity. He said the company needed less hesitation. He said safety culture had become too defensive. He said old systems trained employees to fear progress. Nobody looked at me when he said old systems. I flipped one page. Pierce noticed. His smile stayed on, but his eyes changed. Mason, he said, you document like every conversation is a deposition. I capped my pen. Only the important ones. The room went still for half a breath. Then Pierce laughed too loudly. He told the managers that was why he valued legacy expertise. Valuable, but sometimes overly cautious. That was his gift. He could insult you and make human resources call it appreciation. 2 days later, my access to final exception forms disappeared. Not revoked. Not blocked. Just narrowed. I could view summaries, not source attachments. I could inspect equipment, not close findings. I could attend meetings, not certify outcomes. They had turned my job into a hallway mirror. I could see the smoke, but not pull the alarm. That night, the transfer order arrived. Beaumont, Texas. Report Monday. Duration 6 weeks. No extension anticipated. I read it twice at my motel desk. Outside, rain tapped the parking lot. Inside, the air conditioner rattled like loose bolts. I opened the notebook and added one red line under every transfer date. Then I saw it. Each move came 48 hours before a finding deadline. Not close. Not approximate. Exact enough to make my hands go cold. Pierce was not moving me after I found problems. He was moving me before problems could become official. That was the first time I understood my real job at Aegis. I was not there to fix the plants anymore. I was there to make the cover story look responsible. Beaumont smelled like diesel, river mud, and cold metal. The plant sat near the refinery roads, not far from the Neches River. Heat shimmered above the asphalt even before noon. Trucks rolled through the gate with shrimp, poultry, and frozen produce headed across Texas. Everything looked alive from the outside. Inside, the building felt like a machine holding its breath. I checked in with the plant manager, Russell Kane. He had a handshake like wet cardboard and eyes that kept moving. People like Russell never lie first. They wait to see what you already know. He gave me a visitor badge, a safety vest, and a conference room. Then he offered coffee 3 times. That meant he wanted me seated. I stayed standing. I asked for the ammonia detection maintenance history. He gave me a printed dashboard summary. I asked for the raw sensor logs. He said corporate had centralized those. I asked when corporate started smelling ammonia from Houston. He laughed once, then stopped. That went into the notebook. Blue ink. Direct response. Beaumont Plant 2. 8:42 in the morning. Deflection after raw log request. By 10, I knew Beaumont was worse than Little Rock. Not louder. Not Messier. Worse because everyone had accepted the story. Operators walked past covered sensors like furniture. Supervisors initialed inspection sheets without reading the second page. A safety drill calendar showed perfect attendance. One worker told me quietly the last drill happened during a lunch shift, with half the crew outside already. Paper said 100% participation. Reality said theater. Pierce arrived that afternoon with 2 executives and a photographer. He wore a white hard hat without a scratch on it. His shirt looked ironed by a person who hated wrinkles personally. He gathered managers near the loading dock and talked about discipline. Margin discipline. Reporting discipline. Message discipline. 3 kinds of discipline. None involved telling the truth. I stood behind the group with my notebook closed. Pierce looked past everyone and found me anyway. Mason, he said, Beaumont is a success story. Let us not turn healthy caution into institutional drag. I nodded once. He liked that. Men like Pierce mistake silence for surrender. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. Our buyers do not need every small operational hiccup turned into a federal bedtime story. Nobody reacted. That was the frightening part. Not the words. The comfort around them. 14 plant managers had been trained to hear dangerous things as normal. I opened the notebook and wrote the sentence exactly. Pierce saw my pen move. His face did not change, but his jaw tightened. After the meeting, he asked me to walk with him outside. The heat hit us like an open oven. Trucks idled near the dock. Somewhere overhead, a gull cried above the industrial noise. Pierce kept his voice friendly. Mason, your talent is pattern recognition. That is valuable. But pattern recognition becomes paranoia without executive context. I looked at the loading bay doors. Context does not change a broken alarm. He smiled. You always go straight to the alarm. I said nothing. He stepped closer, still smiling. The company is preparing for a strategic transaction. Infrastructure funds hate uncertainty. You understand that. I did understand it. That was the first time money entered the room without wearing a tie. A sale, a valuation, a deadline. Suddenly, the transfers had a second meaning. Pierce was not just hiding safety failures from regulators. He was polishing 14 plants for buyers who would never walk past the covered sensors. That night, I sat in my motel off Interstate 10. I spread every transfer order across the bedspread. Houston, Baton Rouge, Tulsa, Little Rock, Beaumont. Same 6-week windows. Same finding deadlines. Same phrase buried inside reports. Then I noticed something I had missed. The dates did not align with planned inspections. They aligned with investor site visits. Every time buyers were coming, Pierce moved me in first. Every time I found the rot, he moved me out. I was not the cleanup crew. I was the prop. And the people buying Aegis were about to inherit something much bigger than a safety problem. The betrayal became official in a conference room above the Beaumont floor. Russell Kane sat on my left. 2 regional managers sat across from me. Pierce joined by video from Houston, framed by glass walls and skyline. His face filled the screen with that polished calm executives use before cutting something essential. Human resources called it role clarification. Legal called it scope alignment. Pierce called it protecting the organization from fragmented reporting. I called it what it was. They were removing my teeth and keeping my badge. The new memo said I could observe plant conditions, but not issue formal exceptions. I could advise managers, but not certify deficiencies. I could review summaries, but not request raw system exports without executive approval. Every sentence sounded reasonable alone. Together, they turned a federal compliance auditor into office furniture. I read the memo twice while everyone watched me. Russell rubbed his thumb across a paper cup. One manager checked her phone. Pierce waited for anger. He wanted anger. Anger would make me easier to label. Difficult, defensive, unaligned. I gave him nothing. I placed the memo flat on the table and asked one question. Who authorized the change? Pierce smiled. The executive office did. I uncapped my pen. Full name, please. The smile faded by 1 inch. Mason, this is not a deposition. No, I said. Not yet. The room went quiet. Even the air conditioner seemed to lower its voice. Pierce leaned toward his camera. You have always been thorough. That is why we value you. But we cannot let one employee create unnecessary exposure before a major transaction. There it was. Exposure. Not danger. Not workers. Not alarms. Exposure. He had finally said the clean part dirty. I wrote it down. Blue ink. Direct quote. 2:16 in the afternoon. Beaumont Plant 2. Executive video call. Pierce Sterling linked formal findings to transaction exposure. Russell watched my hand move. His face changed like he had just heard thunder under clear skies. After the call, he walked me to the hallway and lowered his voice. You should let this one go. I looked through the glass at the production floor. Men were stacking cases near a cold room marked restricted access. Above them, a yellow sensor light blinked behind a plastic cover. Why? I asked. Russell swallowed. Because this is bigger than Beaumont. That was the first honest thing anyone had said all week. I did not push him. Pushing makes scared people run. Instead, I waited. He looked toward the ceiling camera again. Then he whispered one phrase. Project Silverline. I wrote nothing until he walked away. Then I went to the parking lot, sat in my rental car, and opened the notebook. Project Silverline got its own page. No assumptions. No theories. Just the words. That night, I drove along Interstate 10 while the refineries burned orange against the dark. The radio played a baseball game from Houston. The announcers sounded calm, like the world still had rules. Mine did too. Document. Preserve. Verify. Never guess. The next morning, I called Priya in compliance records again. I asked about Silverline. She did not speak for 5 seconds. Then she said she could not discuss pending transaction materials. Her voice shook on the word pending. I thanked her and hung up. 10 minutes later, my company laptop lost access to historical transfer files. Not all files. Just mine. Every assignment order older than 60 days disappeared from the portal. That was a mistake. Not because they removed them. Because I had printed every order the day it arrived. Paper has no password. Paper does not forget. By noon, a courier delivered my next assignment packet. Memphis, Tennessee. Report Monday. Duration 6 weeks. No extension anticipated. Same language. Same rhythm. Same trap. I stared at the packet under the motel lamp. Then I opened the notebook to the first blank page after Silverline. For the first time, I did not write a plant name. I wrote a question. What are they selling that they cannot afford to inspect? Memphis changed the shape of the notebook. Until then, I had been tracking plants. In Memphis, I started tracking people. The facility sat south of Beale Street, close enough to feel the city, far enough to be forgotten. It handled frozen poultry, seafood, and prepared meals for grocery chains across 6 states. The loading dock never slept. Trucks came in before sunrise and left under sodium lights after midnight. A plant like that should sound busy. This one sounded nervous. The first worker who spoke to me was named Elena Cruz. She wore a blue hairnet, a thick jacket, and gloves taped at the wrist. She had 12 years on the line and eyes that missed nothing. I asked about evacuation drills. She looked at my badge, then at the ceiling camera. We practice on paper, she said. I asked what that meant. She glanced toward the compressor room. It means the paper gets out faster than we do. That line went into the notebook. Blue ink. Direct quote. 7:38 in the morning. Memphis Plant 4. Worker described false evacuation documentation. I did not ask her to say more. People tell the truth in small pieces when fear is nearby. Push too hard, and fear wins. I walked the floor for 3 days. I checked valve tags, sensor placements, alarm panels, and training binders. The plant had a beautiful safety story on paper. Perfect drills. Perfect sign-offs. Perfect response times. Real life did not match. An exit route near cold storage was blocked by stacked pallets. A backup alarm panel showed repeated resets after midnight. 2 training sheets had signatures from employees who were not scheduled that day. One man had been on vacation in Florida. His signature still appeared beside a drill time in Memphis. That was not a clerical error. That was handwriting wearing a stolen name. I photographed nothing unless policy allowed it. I copied nothing I was not authorized to retain. I wrote everything. Date, time, location, source, exact wording. I kept originals where they belonged and noted where they lived. That mattered. Dirty evidence makes clean truth easier to dismiss. By Friday, my notebook had 3 layers. Black ink for facts, blue ink for spoken words, red ink for repeating dates. Red had started taking over. Every 6th Thursday, a transfer order. Every 5th Monday, a buyer walkthrough. Every 4th Friday, a report downgrade. It looked less like mismanagement and more like choreography. That afternoon, I met Dana Whitmore near a coffee shop off Union Avenue. Dana worked for the insurance carrier reviewing Aegis before Project Silverline closed. She had gray hair, reading glasses, and no patience for corporate perfume. We had crossed paths for years during renewal season. She trusted paper more than people, which made her easy to respect. I showed her nothing confidential. I only described the pattern. 6-week rotations. Repeated language. Downgraded reports. False drills. Buyer visits. Dana listened without interrupting. Then she folded her napkin into a square. Mason, she said, if that pattern is real, this is not a planned issue. It is enterprise risk. I looked through the window at traffic sliding past. Enterprise risk meant the rot had climbed above managers. It meant board exposure, insurance exposure, federal exposure. It meant Pierce was not containing problems. He was packaging them. Dana did not ask for my notebook. Smart people know when not to touch a live wire. She only said one more thing before leaving. Keep your chain clean. The second they panic, they will attack the paper first. She was right. Monday morning, my Memphis access narrowed again. Historical incident summaries vanished. Then my calendar updated by itself. St. Louis. Report next week. Duration 6 weeks. No extension anticipated. I stared at the screen inside a quiet break room. Elena passed behind me carrying a stack of hairnets. She stopped just long enough to whisper without looking over. They do not send you to fix things. They send you so they can say things were looked at. I did not answer. I opened the notebook and wrote her words exactly. Then I underlined them in red. St. Louis was where the notebook stopped being mine. The plant sat across the river from the Gateway Arch, tucked behind warehouses and railroad tracks. Cold mist hung over the loading yard that morning. Trucks backed into doors with low warning beeps. Inside, everyone already knew my name. That was never good. A receptionist handed me my badge without asking for identification. A plant manager named Owen Fields met me before I reached the turnstile. He had the smile of a man following instructions he hated. "Mason," he said, "corporate wants this visit kept narrow. Equipment walkthrough only. No employee interviews. No historical file review." I looked at the badge in my hand. "Then why bring me here?" Owen glanced toward the security camera. "Optics," he said. One word. Clean enough to deny. Dirty enough to matter. I wrote it down in the parking lot 5 minutes later. Blue ink. Direct quote. St. Louis Plant 6. Corporate visit described as optics. By lunch, I knew St. Louis had the same sickness with better manners. The alarms worked during demonstrations. The binders looked beautiful. The floor routes were freshly painted. But old tape lines showed where pallets had blocked exits for months. Sensor housings had dust rings around newer screws. Maintenance forms had the same phrase I had seen across 5 states. Temporary calibration drift. This time, it appeared beside a refrigeration shutdown from 3 weeks earlier. The official report said no operational impact. The shipping record said otherwise. 6 outbound trucks had been delayed overnight. A grocery chain in Chicago had rejected 2 loads for temperature variance. That meant the problem had escaped the plant. It had reached customers. Pierce was not hiding a safety issue anymore. He was hiding a business truth from buyers, insurers, and possibly federal reviewers. That afternoon, my phone buzzed during a walkthrough. Unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Then a text appeared. Federal Investigator. Please call from a non-company phone. My first thought was Dana. My second thought was chain of custody. I did not call from the plant. I finished the walkthrough. I signed only what I personally observed. Then I drove to a public library near Forest Park and sat in the far corner. The man who answered had a calm voice. He introduced himself as Federal Investigator Calvin Rusk. He did not ask for documents first. That told me he was careful. He asked if I kept contemporaneous notes from site visits. I looked at the notebook on the table. Yes. He asked if anyone at Aegis had limited my access after those notes began. Yes. He asked if I had been moved shortly before formal findings deadlines. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Yes. Then he said something that made the room feel smaller. "Mr. Grant, you are not the only person who noticed the pattern." I said nothing. He continued. An insurance consultant preserved a draft exception report before it disappeared. Dana had not vanished. She had stepped out of the hallway and gone where the walls had ears. Rusk did not ask me to send anything. He asked me to preserve everything. Original notebooks, printed transfer orders, assignment packets, calendar notices, names of witnesses. He used the word preserve like a match near dry grass. That meant the quiet phase was ending. I drove back to my hotel under a pale Missouri sky. The gateway arch flashed silver in my rearview mirror. For months, I thought the notebook was a shield. Something to protect myself when Pierce blamed me. I was wrong. It was not a shield. It was a skeleton key. Not because it opened doors. Because it proved which doors had been locked on purpose. That night, Pierce called my personal cell for the first time in years. "Mason," he said, "I hear you are asking questions in St. Louis." I looked at the notebook beside the lamp. "No, Pierce," I said. "Other people are." The next morning, St. Louis looked clean enough to lie. Sunlight hit the gateway arch like polished evidence. I checked out of the hotel at 6:10 and drove to a diner near Interstate 64. I ordered black coffee, dry toast, and nothing that would slow my hands. The notebook sat in my bag under the table. My company laptop stayed in the trunk. Special Agent Rusk had been clear. Use nothing they can touch. At 7:02, my phone rang from a Houston number. This time, it was not Pierce. It was General Counsel Meredith Cole. Her voice sounded careful and expensive. "Mason," she said, "we need to discuss your recent communications." I stirred my coffee once. "Which communications?" There was a pause. The kind lawyers use when they dislike clean questions. Any external discussions involving confidential company matters. I looked through the diner window at commuters moving past. "I have not disclosed confidential company material improperly." She exhaled softly. That was not a denial. It was a warning wearing a suit. Then she said the wrong sentence. "The company expects all handwritten materials created during employment to be returned immediately." I stopped stirring. Handwritten materials. Not laptop files. Not reports. The notebook. Pierce had told her enough to be afraid, but not enough to understand. I asked her to send the request in writing. She said she already had. The email arrived before I paid the check. Subject line, immediate return of company property. Attached was a 2-page demand letter. It called my notes proprietary operational records. That made me smile for the first time all week. They had just authenticated the thing they wanted to bury. I forwarded nothing. I replied with one sentence. Please preserve all related records under applicable legal hold obligations. Then I called Federal Investigator Rusk from a prepaid phone outside a gas station. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Bring the original notebook to Houston. Do not mail it. Do not scan it. Do not let anyone handle it." I drove south that afternoon. St. Louis faded behind me. Arkansas rolled by in green ridges. Memphis came and went under a purple evening sky. Every mile felt quieter than the last. Not peaceful, focused. The kind of quiet before a storm changes pressure. I reached Houston before dawn 2 days later. The federal building sat gray and square against the morning. Nothing dramatic. No cameras. No shouting. Just metal detectors, tired elevators, and people carrying folders that could end careers. Rusk met me in a small conference room with another investigator named Helen Cho. Dana Whitmore was already there. She looked older than she had in Memphis, but steadier. On the table sat her preserved draft exception report. Beside it lay my printed transfer orders. 14 sets. Same rhythm. 6 weeks. No extension. Same downgrade windows. Same investor visits. Same executive routing. I placed the notebook between them. Nobody touched it for several seconds. Then Cho put on gloves and opened to the first red underline. She read silently, page after page. Houston, Baton Rouge, Tulsa, Little Rock, Beaumont, Memphis, St. Louis. Then 7 more plants I had not even known were connected until Dana showed the insurance schedule. That was the final turn. Pierce had not moved me through 14 plants because I was discovering the pattern. He moved me because I was part of it. My presence had been used as proof of oversight in buyer documents. Mason Grant reviewed site conditions. Mason Grant supported safety validation. Mason Grant observed operational readiness. My name was printed like a seat belt in a car with no brakes. Helen Cho turned one page and looked up. "Mr. Grant, did you approve these summaries?" "No." "Did anyone ask permission to use your name this way?" "No." Rusk closed a folder. Then the room changed. Not loudly, not visibly, but I felt the air shift. The evidence had crossed a line. It was no longer about unsafe plants. It was about a company selling confidence it did not own. At 4:47 that afternoon, federal preservation notices went out. By sunrise, Aegis would learn what paperwork can do when it finally stops being polite. By 8:12 the next morning, Aegis stopped sounding like a company. It sounded like a switchboard drowning. Houston called first, then Baton Rouge, then Tulsa, Little Rock, Beaumont, Memphis, and St. Louis. After that came the names I had only seen on Dana's insurance schedule. Des Moines, Mobile, Savannah, Knoxville, Wichita, Louisville. 14 plants received federal suspension notices before most executives reached their desks. No one was allowed to erase, adjust, summarize, or refresh anything. Every email stayed. Every draft stayed. Every quiet edit became louder because someone had tried to hide it. I was back in the same Houston conference room by 10. Rain dragged gray lines down the windows over Buffalo Bayou. Pierce sat across from me with Meredith Cole beside him. His suit looked perfect. His face did not. Special Agent Rusk placed my notebook on the table. Helen Cho placed the transfer schedule beside it. Dana's preserved draft report came next. 3 quiet objects. No speeches. No drama. Just paper doing what people were too scared to do. Rusk pointed at the first transfer. Houston to Baton Rouge. Then the first red underline. Same week. Same buyer visit. Cho pointed at Tulsa. Same phrase. Temporary calibration drift. Then Little Rock. Same downgrade. Beaumont. Same access restriction. Memphis. Same false drill pattern. St. Louis. Same use of my name in oversight summaries I never approved. Pierce tried to call it fragmented documentation. Rusk turned one page. Pierce tried to call it operational complexity. Cho turned another. Meredith stopped taking notes. That was when I knew she had seen the shape of it. Pierce had not built a system. He had built a story. My notebook was only dangerous because it restored the missing chapters. The board removed him before sunset. They called it an immediate leadership transition. Corporate people love soft words for hard falls. Meredith resigned 2 days later. 3 regional managers signed cooperation agreements. The buyer paused Project Silverline indefinitely. Insurance carriers issued reservation of rights letters that landed like bricks. Aegis created a worker safety restitution fund after federal reviewers found repeated reporting failures. The public statement said the company had discovered unacceptable gaps. That was almost funny. They had not discovered them. They had been walked to the edge by a black notebook and forced to look down. My settlement came 6 weeks later. The number was fair enough to buy silence, but not ownership. I signed only after my attorney confirmed the federal record stayed untouched. No retraction. No apology tour. No fake retirement post. Aegis offered me a senior advisory role after the dust settled. Bigger title. Bigger money. Corner office in Houston. I told them no. Not because I hated them. Hate still ties you to the building. I was tired of carrying alarms for people who kept pulling batteries out. 2 Fridays later, I packed my truck before sunrise. The old notebook went into a cardboard archive box. A new one sat on the passenger seat, still clean. I drove west on Interstate 10 with rain moving across the windshield. Houston faded behind me in gray layers of glass, concrete, and promises. Near San Antonio, the sky opened into that wide Texas blue that makes everything feel smaller. I thought about Elena in Memphis, Dana in that coffee shop, Priya lowering her voice in Houston. People always think corporations collapse because one person finally speaks. That is not true. They collapse because hundreds of people already knew, and one record finally proved it. Pierce believed power meant controlling the story. He forgot stories need memory. He forgot ink survives pressure. He forgot quiet men sometimes write maps. I did not ruin Aegis. I did not need to. Greed built the machine. Fear kept it running. Procedure turned it off. And somewhere behind me, 14 silent plants were learning the difference between appearing safe and being safe.